Hey YouTube, welcome back to the channel. Today, I'll be unboxing the new Cartier Tank Francaise Automatic, which was launched just a few weeks ago, January 2023 to be specific. Just as I do in my other videos, I'll take a closer look at the watch and try to cover details as comprehensively as possible. Oddballs and standouts from these details, whether positive or negative, will be featured in the notable points section of this video. Towards the end, I'll also offer final thoughts after wearing the watch for a few days. Alright then, without further ado, let's get on with it. For fans of the brand, this box should look familiar. Simple gold Cartier branding on a red background. Open it up and you find the inner box inside. The front flap of the outer box folds down for easy access to the inner box. Let's take the inner box out. I won't go over the receipt with you guys since this is something that varies on a per transaction basis. So let's set this aside for now and take a look at the inner box. There's a gold button on the front part of the inner box. Press on it and the top clamshell opens on its own. We'll get to the watch later, but you're greeted by simple Cartier branding on black suede material. Since this is the Tank Francaise, there aren't any other straps or tools included with the watch. Over here you have the Cartier guarantee card and the sleeve, which contains a basic Cartier care brochure and simple instruction booklet. Registering your timepiece under the Cartier Care program extends the warranty to 8 years, by the way, which is pretty neat. Let's put all of these back and get on with the watch. This ships straight from the dealer's inventory, so we have a bunch of protective plastic that we have to remove first. There's one. Most of you ought to be familiar with the Cartier Tank, but to quickly recap, it's a third timepiece that Cartier ever released commercially, following the Santos and Tortue. Many variants of the Tank were released over the decades that followed, including the Tank Américaine in 1989, the Tank Francaise in 1996, and the Tank Anglaise in 2012, which sort of represent Cartier's traditional New York, Paris, and London hubs, respectively. Today's spotlight is on the evolved form of that trio's middle child, the Tank Francaise. Before anything else, some dimensions are in order. Without the crown, the case width sits at 30.5mm. With it, the figure increases to a little over 33mm. Case length is 27mm without the lugs and 36.5mm with it. The bracelet and lug width is 22mm. Moving to the side here, the case is almost 10mm thick with the crystal sitting flush. The thickness tapers toward the edge, paring the figure down to 6.5mm. Lastly, the heptagon crown is roughly 7mm in diameter. Compared to most of the tanks that came before it, the Tank Francaise is noticeably squarer. The watch case and bracelet revolve around this theme. The square dial and crystal sit perfectly in line with the bracelet, and the case sides, brancas they call it, flank the dial on both sides to make this watch a tank. If you've gotten used to the rectangular profiles of tanks released in the last few decades, it may feel a bit odd to see how square the Tank Francaise is. But do note that the first ever tank commercially released, the 1917 Tank Normale, featured the same square crystal and dial configuration as the Tank Francaise. Viewing it from the side, we can see that the Tank Francaise curves to follow wrist contours better. The sides of the case are the only parts that are polished, other than the 7-sided crown. Its front and rear faces both sport vertical brushing and make it look a little more robust than tanks usually do. Like in other stainless steel Cartier timepieces, a blue spinel cabochon sits in the middle of the polished heptagon crown, itself recessed into the case side. I'll talk more about this in the notable points section of this video. Moving back to the front of the watch, both ends of the brancos terminate at angles that flow into the bracelet's end links, completing the frame for the Tank Francaise dial. The dial is my favorite part of this timepiece, but let's go through the bracelet first and circle back afterwards. Unlike the first Tank Francaise, this updated model gets entirely brushed end links instead of ones with polished outer sections. The story continues with each link on the bracelet, where thin polished strips can be found flanked by vertically brushed center sections and outer segments. The use of brushed finishes on the outer segments help make the new Tank Francaise feel just a little bit sportier. In contrast, the polished outer segments on its predecessor worked in tandem with smaller sizing to exude a more refined and elegant feel. Like the watch case, the side of the bracelet feature polished finishes as well. Both ends of the bracelet terminate with a push-button deployant clasp, its mechanism seemingly identical to the Santos de Cartier's. Alright, on to my favorite part of this watch, the dial. From afar, it looks like your typical Cartier dial, with Roman numerals on a monochromatic background. Look closer, however, and you discover tiny details that work very well together. Rather than stick with traditional white, Cartier used a subtle pearl silver base for the dial. While slightly metallic when viewed from certain angles, it stays muted most of the time. No starburst finishing was employed here. The Tank Francaise dial features very fine vertical brushing instead. The Roman numerals look black most of the time. I'll cover them in greater detail in the notable points part of this video. Sword hands in blued steel offer great legibility over the pearl silver dial for easy time reading. Cartier chose to keep the printing on the dial simple. There's Cartier branding in prominent print, automatic in lighter type, and Swiss made below 6 o'clock. The secret Cartier signature predictably makes its appearance on the V at 7 o'clock, as it always does on light-colored dials. The chemin de fer, or railway track minute markers, actually have their inner and outer tracks engraved into the dial this time around. I haven't seen this done in other Cartier pieces before and think it works very well in making the dial complex yet uncomplicated. To balance things out, an outer border is also engraved, perfectly framing the Roman numerals in between. The date window, now at 3 o'clock instead of 6 as in the old Tank Francaise, cuts halfway into the Roman 3. I personally don't mind this, though I totally understand how some folks can be bothered by the asymmetry this introduces and by the rather deep setting of the date disc. I mentioned earlier that the Roman numerals on the dial look black most of the time. You'd almost think that the numerals were just printed or painted on the dial, until you start moving the Tank Francaise around anyway. When light hits them right, the Roman numerals shimmer to remind you that they are indeed applied indices. Unlike the Roman numerals found in the blue Santos de Cartier's dial, however, the applied indices on the Tank Francaise appear to be black chrome and extra thin. These applied Roman numerals round out the sublime execution of the Tank Francaise's dial, and while I'm a Santos guy through and through, I have to concede that the dial on this timepiece is the best Cartier dial I currently have in my collection. Cartier also provides 2 half links with the new Tank Francaise, a welcome change from the Santos de Cartier's lack of them. There wasn't any room for Cartier to include the polished strips found on the full links, though this shouldn't be much of an issue since the half links stay out of sight most of the time. They're actually closer in length to 2/3 of a full link than half, allowing a greater deal of flexibility in terms of combinations, with one caveat. The female end of each link has a peg on one side to prevent over-flexing between links. This peg goes right into a notch on the male side of each full length. Let's make it clear here. There you go. Unfortunately, the male ends of both half lengths do not have these slots. This makes it impossible to install two half lengths together, which would have been useful if you're trying to shift the weight balance of the watch or deployant to one side. Because of this limitation, you're forced to install the half lengths on either side of the deployant if you wish to use both of them. As promised, this section isn't entirely about good stuff. While we're on the topic of links and bracelets, I want to point out the gaps between the bracelet end links and the case here. Let's see if we can make that clear. And the huge gap between both sides of the butterfly deployant. The fit and finish of the bracelet just isn't at par with what we see on the Santos de Cartiers or even older Santos models. At the time of launch, Cartier's introduction of a recessed crown to the Tank Francaise didn't seem to sit too well with a lot of people. I personally don't mind it, since this configuration allowed the use of a larger crown that is, quite frankly, a treat to wind and handle. It's actually perfectly sized for a non-automatic movement. Having a crown this large plainly jut out from the side of the watch case would have looked worse, in my opinion. Last for this section, the movement. Cartier calls the movement in the new Tank Francaise Automatic caliber 1853. It's not an in-house movement. The 1853 is based on the Sellita SW100, itself based on the ETA 2671 that Cartier used to put in older and smaller Santos models. Power reserve is quoted to be 37 hours, which is pretty short by today's standards. I haven't opened the watch up yet, but my understanding is that the caliber 1853 has a screw regulator on it for easy adjustment. I'll have to explore this soon, since the watch has been running a very consistent but inaccurate 7 seconds fast in the past few days. Fun fact before we move on to the last section. I learned from Grail Watch Reference here that Sellita used to be a subcon manufacturer for ETA, manufacturing a range of ETA branded movements including the 2671. I'm not a movement snob at all, and personally hold ETA in high regard when it comes to durability and ease of regulation. Hopefully, the ETA quality that I've come to love carries over to Cartier's caliber 1853. The older, large model Cartier Tank Francaise is a watch that has never failed to catch my attention whenever I see it out in the wild on someone else's wrist. Its restrained proportions and judicious use of polished sections gave it an aura of quiet, confident elegance, never asking for attention, but effortlessly capturing it nonetheless. I'll admit that I'm one of the few who wished Cartier had stuck with a formula that worked. Polished outer segments on the bracelet, less integrated shield-like end links, and slim bars between the watch case and the rest of the end links. But that would have been a mere re-release instead of an evolution. After wearing the new Tank Francaise, I've come to appreciate that this is an entirely different watch. Its relatively rugged presentation gives it a more get-up-and-go appeal, a sporty tank, if you will. Even with its larger size, it stays quiet and doesn't beg for attention, only revealing the complexity of its beautiful dial upon closer examination. These qualities make it perfect for adventures in the city. So similar, yet so different from its predecessor. Conditions permitting, I think there is space for both new and old Tank Francaises in a collection. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you want to see more of these, I'd really appreciate if you could hit like on this video and subscribe to my channel. I promise not to spam your feed with clickbaity thumbnails and the like. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.